Nintendo will decide what fun you have. Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hi, my name is Phil Thomas, and I'm still a video game newbie.
Hey, I'm Elford Stephens. I'm a long-term video game lover and aficionado.
Hi, I'm Kate. I write software for a living, and I one time caught a legendary Pokemon with a great ball.
Whoa, nice. I can't follow that up. I'm Andy Hunter, longtime gamer, longtime Pokemaniac.
And we are back we got a full house this time to start wrapping up our longer than I had anticipated discussion about Pokemon-related fan projects. So I hope everyone, both in the chat and those listening at home, have been having as much fun as I have been with this. It's made me think about Pokemon a lot more than I have in a long time. So I hope you're all excited. Last time, we talked about the diverse ways video game companies respond to fan-developed projects that appropriate the intellectual property. As we covered, some companies strike them down, either with takedown strikes or cease and desist notices. However, others will either ignore them or outright embrace fan initiatives, with some companies either hiring developers from the fan community or releasing mods or fan games as retail products. However, we're talking about Pokemon ROM hacks and fan games here, so to bring us back on topic on a series that is already longer than it has any right to be, let's take a closer look at how Nintendo handles fan projects, which will then bring us back to Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium. Like other companies, Nintendo has sent their fair share of takedown notices and cease and desist letters, sometimes directing their attention toward Pokemon projects. For example, in March 2010, Nintendo sent a cease and desist order to Pokénet, a Java-based Pokemon MMO released in 2009. The company also issued a DMCA takedown against Pokemon Essentials, a popular toolkit for developing Pokemon fan games in RPG Maker XP, and they sent that takedown in August of 2018. Also, as with other major game companies such as Sega, Square Enix, or Activision, the overwhelming majority of fan projects will attract no response from Nintendo, and for evidence that I point to most of the ROM hacks and fan games that are not named Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium. There are also cases where the fan creators reach out to Nintendo, with Nintendo basically looking the other way, not endorsing their work, but also not actively trying to shut it down. And check out the Mother 3 fan translation as a notable example that we've gone back to numerous times on this series. Nintendo also offers numerous avenues for fan projects using official assets that can be shared with other players, although through carefully mediated spaces like the Super Mario Maker series. However, when compared to other players in the games industry, Nintendo has also developed a reputation of being a bit extra when it comes to responding to unauthorized uses of their IP. Based on the company's track record, Nintendo appears determined to make sure everyone knows that the only way to experience their content is through Nintendo-approved channels, and if they have to threaten to sue some 9-year-old to get their point across, then so be it. Make no mistake, if Nintendo gets you in their sights, watch out, because they will make a fucking example of you.
Gotta sue them all.
I mean, in Nintendo's defense, haven't we all wanted to sue a 9-year-old?
Especially that one who beat me in Fortnite, the bastard. You've danced the last time. A lot of Nintendo's aggressive response hinges on the company's hardline stance against emulation in all forms. As we covered a few episodes ago, while it hasn't been tested too much in the courts, emulators, which we learned are software designed to replicate the experience of a specific computer or video game system, are generally considered legally okay as long as they were reverse engineered without the use of that system's proprietary code, and emulation has been an important element of video game preservation, especially given the video game industry's generally terrible track record when it comes to preserving its own history, which has left it to fans to save video game history themselves, even sometimes at the expense of skirting IP laws, and that will be a topic we cover in a future episode. Nintendo views emulation as solely a vector for piracy, one that needs to be stamped out no matter the cost. For a long time, the company had a section on their website devoted to addressing emulation, where it called the practice, quote, the greatest threat to date to the intellectual property rights of video game developers, end quote. They even argued that downloading a digital copy as a backup to a game you purchased also constituted piracy, reasoning that since you did not create that copy from your game, then it wasn't your backup and was therefore a pirated game. Writing, quote, The backup archival copy exception is a very narrow limitation relating to a copy being made by the rightful owner of an authentic game to ensure he or she has won in the event of damage or destruction of the authentic. Therefore, whether you have an authentic game or not, or whether you have possession of a Nintendo ROM for a limited amount of time, i.e. 24 hours, it is illegal to download and play a Nintendo ROM from the internet, end quote. And I will just point out one little note about that 24 hours refers to, there was a common belief in the online community dating back to the late 90s and 2000s in the emulation scene that you could download a ROM so long as you deleted it after 24 hours. There's no basis in legality of that. Someone just made that up and just people kind of picked that up. And so that's what Nintendo's talking about here. Kate, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't know if this is like relevant so much to the episode, but just I can't help but think of, when you're talking about like you're allowed to make a backup as long as it's your own copy and you can preserve it only for yourself. This kind of reminds me a little bit of certain electronic resource publishing for academia. There are some academic resources that it's like you basically purchase, let's say, PDF files of articles or videos. Usually it's video and audio. And they give you that stuff that you can download from a service, a vendor, and you can theoretically just keep downloading it and using it as long as you have the subscription. But in some cases, it's legal to download it as sort of a backup in the event that, like, basically part of the vendor agreement is you get to keep that content in perpetuity for yourself and your own personal distribution as part of the license you purchased. And if we decide to stop hosting it, you can serve it from, a hard drive under your desk, but only for the purposes you've been using it for. But like, that's something that's specifically very tricky right now for libraries, where it's like, well, that's technically our content and we need to truly preserve it. And a hard drive under someone's desk isn't preservation. Does it go in a repository that we can then serve out later? Is that a violation of the law? We don't know. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And I haven't done enough research, but I know there was that big court case recently with the Internet Archive.
Yeah, no, you're right. That was absolutely, and I recall that was kind of like the controlled digital lending became a thing during the pandemic when people couldn't get into libraries. So basically you'd start to digitize things that otherwise you necessarily wouldn't. And there were a lot of interesting conversations around, is this legal? How do we make this legal? And figured the Internet Archive was going to be first on the chopping block for that. I think they handled that pretty admirably, though.
Oh, hey, sorry. I just wanted to shove a throwaway joke in here. Hold for editing. So, I'm not an authority on ROMs. In fact, you could say that I don't know anything about them. But what I've heard is that, one, it is legal to download and play these ROMs for 24 hours as long as you never feed them after midnight.
Oh, man. But yeah, and I think you make a good point with that, kid. I know there's a provision in copyright law that, yeah, you can hold on to a digital copy. And so long as you own that copy, and if you say sold or got rid of your original copy, you then have the super pinky promise under copyright law that you'll delete the backup.
There's a certain thing, I think it's called a perpetual license. If I've purchased a perpetual license to one instance of a piece of software, then in theory, yeah, that means like I own that one copy of that piece of software forever, as long as I continue to use it as just that. If it's like just mine and I might continue to use it just for myself, but then if I burn a bunch of copies and give it to my, my good friends, Elford and Andy and Phil, then I'm in breach of that. And if they really care, they being whoever they publish, like, then yeah, they could definitely come after me. But perpetual licenses exist. They, as far as I know, they continue to exist. And again, what's interesting is you have this idea of a perpetual license, but I mean, there is this uncomfortable notion of how long will a piece of media survive? Oh, it will survive forever. And we've seen this definitely with video games, where it's like, you can't play that game anymore on the software where you bought it from. So that's why emulators exist, right? But sometimes you're actually in breach of the use of the software, but it's sort of, it's in conflict with what the promise was of purchasing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, also the brass tacks point of that is that no one made that agreement for a perpetual license when they bought any of these old games, and people ripped them on their own.
I mean, didn't they though? When you buy a piece of physical media, isn't there something of a promise like it's yours forever?
Yeah, you could make that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the counter argument to that would be, sure, yeah, you bought that NES game, it will work on your NES forever. You buying that NES cartridge does not entitle you to then play that game on your Super NES or your GameCube, etc.
So you find a way to like hack it into future generations of the software. It's like, well, you're kind of you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. We promise to let you play it on this game, on this system, for as long as that system stays alive, and as long as we choose to support the software.
That's the whole thing, is that like Nintendo and a lot of companies, they hold all the cards when it comes to this. And if your game breaks, you got to buy a new one. If the system becomes obsolete, you have to hope that they're going to bring it over to the next generation or whatever. And if they don't, then you basically have to wait till they decide that they do. That's basically Nintendo's stance. Nintendo's basic stance is that, so this is actually kind of an extreme idea of emulation, even compared to other game companies. Not a lot of other game companies have made a lot of big statements about emulation and piracy. Nintendo in particular is pretty vocal about it. So some other companies will kind of tacitly acknowledge that emulation is to a certain level okay. So for example, Sony sued Bleem. People made Bleem, which is a PlayStation emulator. And that is like one of the few cases where there actually is a court test over this. And the court ruled in favor of the guys who made Bleem because of the things I mentioned before, because they developed it themselves. And it wasn't developed with proprietary software developed by Sony, and which basically gave a tacit endorsement in the US law that you could make an emulator. The ROMs were a whole separate issue. But Nintendo's stance is that even emulators themselves, even while to this, again, not a lawyer, even while at this point protected under the courts, are not okay because they view emulation as solely a vector for piracy. So that's Nintendo's stance on this. And they're willing to back up this fiery rhetoric with legal action. And if you host or share ROMs, watch out, because Nintendo's coming for you. Case in point, on July the 19th, 2018, Nintendo of America sued the operators of two ROM hosting sites, loveroms.com and loveretro.co, for copyright infringement, trademark infringement, and unfair competition. The company sought financial damages of $150,000 for the infringement of each Nintendo copyrighted work and up to $2 million for the infringement of each Nintendo trademark. So every single instance of a game that's on this site that is connected to a Nintendo property was considered a separate instance of infringement. So $150,000 plus $2 million for each of them. And this is on top of covering attorney's fees and a bunch of other demands that Nintendo made. All of this is not only to punish the likes of Love ROMs for copyright infringement, but to scare off anyone else doing it and send the message that if you share that digital copy of James Pond 2 codename RoboCod for the Super NES, Nintendo will burn your fucking house down. Nintendo will also go after content creators who use their game properties in ways that seem to implicitly endorse emulation. For example, there's a whole subgenre of Let's Play YouTubers who do challenge runs of various games where they need to mod the game they're playing in some way, all of which would require some access to a ROM. For example, while researching Pokemon, I really got into solo runs where someone attempts to beat a mainline Pokemon game using one Pokemon. To accomplish a solo run, players use a randomizer that alters the game's ROM to replace one of the starter Pokemon with the one they want to complete the game with. And I found them fun to watch. They're one of the things I really got into while I was researching this. And it's kind of neat to see someone get through a game with a Pokemon that gets written off, like a solo Magikarp or like a solo Bellsprout challenge or something. And shout out to Van Man, Gym Leader Matt, and Madrybread for providing me with tons of enjoyment while preparing these episodes. And I'll share links to their respective channels in the description. And that is a kind of fun that Nintendo can't abide. For example, on April the 6th, 2023, a challenge YouTuber named Eric Marino, aka Point Crow, posted a run of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where he played the game with a multiplayer mod, only for Nintendo to hit him with a copyright claim, as well as claims on 27 other videos on his channel. Later that month, on April the 23rd, another Zelda challenge YouTuber named Croton announced on Twitter that Nintendo had issued strikes on 12 of their videos. In a Twitter post following the takedown notices, Point Crow accused Nintendo of punishing some of the company's most dedicated fans, saying, quote, "It's hard to become excited for Tears of the Kingdom when the Zelda community is being nuked off YouTube," end quote. Side note about Point Crow, he also does a lot of fun Let's Plays of Pokemon fan games, including Pokemon Uranium, as well as a bunch of others. So if you're interested in seeing these games in action, I recommend you check out his channel before Nintendo shuts them all down. Like I just recently watched one. It was a modded, I think it was it a Radiant Diamond is the name of the Diamond remake? Whatever the Diamond remake is on Switch.
Oh yeah, the official one, yeah, Brilliant Diamond.
Brilliant Diamond. So he did a run of Brilliant Diamond where it was modded that every time his Pokemon gained a level, it randomly evolved into another Pokemon, which was very funny to watch. So you'd see like this Pokemon, if it started as like a Bulbasaur, it would then evolve into like a Magikarp, and then would evolve into like Mewtwo or like Dialga. And just every level it changed to something different. And sometimes it was a legendary and sometimes it wasn't.
That sounds like an awesome mod they could build into the next Pokemon game.
I'd play
They
that.
could switch that on.
They won't even let you turn off experience share now. So they're not going to let you have that kind of outside the box fun.
Just imagine downgrading from Dialga to like Caterpie between levels.
Nintendo will decide what fun you have.
Hey, Kevin, can I ask another noob question?
Go for it.
So what you were taking us through just there was Nintendo's current stance on ROM hacks and emulation, right? For some reason, I expected that you were going to tell us about like the play-by-play of the history from the 80s through now, or is it more that they've just always had this aggressive stance?
So that's a great question. I'm not going to take you through the entire history of Nintendo responses, mostly because I'm a hack and a fraud and I don't know it very well. But these are a lot of really recent examples that have helped. Nintendo built a reputation in the gaming community as someone who really takes a really tough stance. And like I said, they don't always make a response, but oftentimes when they do make a response, it's, one could argue, very over the top. One thing they've been doing recently has been a lot of copyright strikes. I'll show you an example of another one in a moment. And occasionally sending out these cease and desist letters, which we're also going to, spoiler alert, we're going to see in a minute with Uranium and Prism.
So just to confirm, their point of view has essentially never changed since they started.
I can't say that it's never changed, but I know that at least in the digital age, that they've taken a very hard line on this.
Okay, thanks.
So you can print as many copies of those playing cards as you want, Phil, but everything else is off the table.
Oh, that was the question I actually was going to ask, but I was afraid to. So thanks, Kate.
I'm still thinking about this mod that was changing the Pokemon every time they leveled. I was thinking about Monster Hunter. Like every 20 minutes, it re-rolls and switches your weapon, gives you the items for that weapon, and you, in the middle of the battle, you just have to change your play style to match the new weapon. That would be really cool.
I'd play that. That's awesome.
That'd be a pretty cool D&D module too, right? Like every so often you're just like, you have to re-roll your stats or something like that.
Oh yeah, like each time you level up. Sorry, yeah, you were a level 4 cleric. Now you're a level 5 sorcerer. Figure it out.
Great. Yeah, this is so much fun. I was using a lance directly under this monster, and now I have dual blades.
It would be like the arenas, except even more hardcore.
Imagine other games, like imagine like Dark Souls, where like you're in the middle of a boss fight and all of a sudden your build changes.
That would be awesome to watch.
Oh God.
Heavy strength build. I hope you like casting.
No.
But yeah, so Nintendo's got a pretty active history of going after channels that post any Nintendo-related content. Speaking of content creators, for example, in February 2022, Nintendo issued over 4,000 copyright claims against a single YouTuber, Gilva Sunner, who shared soundtracks for Nintendo games on their YouTube channel. And in response, Gilva Sunner deleted their channel. Several months later, in May 2022, another user called Deoxys Prime received over 500 strikes from Nintendo from hosting copyrighted music. Well, you can make a case that Nintendo was defending their intellectual property from people monetizing it for YouTube ad revenue. I mean, you can make that argument. They're definitely putting up something that belongs to Nintendo. Although my counterpoint is that it's not like Nintendo makes it easy for people to access things like their music online. Now, all that being said, it's kind of harder to defend Nintendo going after channels running documentary histories of video games. For example, on December the 8th, 2022, Nintendo of America sent a copyright strike to the channel Did You Know Gaming for an episode they ran on Heroes of Hyrule, a canceled Zelda game proposed by Retro Studios. The video was taken down only to be reinstated on December 29th after Did You Know Gaming appealed to YouTube. So sometimes they'll sometimes even just put out copyright strikes for things that you can make the argument are for critical or educational purposes. If they have content, there's always a chance that Nintendo will come and make a strike on it.
So question, hasn't somebody, I don't think every game studio has the same stance, right? There are probably some others that are much more permissive of that type of content out there, probably because it increases fan engagement. Has somebody ever considered printing out a PDF of a case study of that and sending it to Nintendo saying, you know what, you're actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot. This is a great way to boost sales.
Just pointing in the direction of FromSoft, speaking of Dark Souls before, they totally, the amount of press that FromSoft gets for Dark Souls mods is like an interesting counterpoint. But Nintendo has historically, for a very long time, has always kind of done their own thing. Their company's always been managed a very specific way. They like to keep things in-house as much as they can. And they are willing to defend that sort of closed box format by the legal means they have necessary. I'm also not saying that they don't have any right to do this in a lot of these cases.
I'm curious. I was going to say, I'm curious. Why do you suppose that is? And I'm genuinely asking. I'm not asking because I think I know the answer. I'm genuinely asking.
I don't know. I don't know why they're like that.
No, for instance, yeah. I could hypothesize with Disney why they're so like tight on. Like I remember there was a time when, if anyone remembers, the Disney store at the mall, if they saw you taking photos. I used to do a photo scavenger hunt with my friends in high school and college. And the only place where we got thrown out was the Disney store because we were taking a picture of something that had Mickey Mouse on it. And they were like, get out, because there's a tight level of desired control over every image that has anything to do with Disney. We could talk all day probably about what that's motivated by. I'm wondering, like, is it a desire for control with Nintendo? Have they been burned before?
From what I've heard, one, it does seem like Nintendo does want to maintain a strict amount of control in the sense of the characters who they view as like family-friendly characters. They don't want people out there, I think, creating images that are contrary.
You don't want that of Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin pissing on the bumper sticker of Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, but also it seems like just in general they've all, for a long time, just been an old-fashioned company. And I mean, like now, from what I gather, the state of their online services is like state of the art if it were 2010, so that they just like Kevin said, we're going to do things our own way. Like even like super simple stuff, like a lot of the industry right now is moving toward increases in accessibility and letting people, remap buttons however they want. And like Tears of the Kingdom apparently is really being, I mean, it's being well praised in many respects, except for apparently like a complete lack of like button remapping. Yeah. Which just makes it super hard for sort of limited mobility or something like that. So they're just like, this is the way we choose to present our stuff, and you can take it or leave it.
Yeah, and where else are you going to go? Because we'll sue you if you do anything different.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nintendo's been for a long time very protective and very controlling of their intellectual property. That's been a policy for a long time. And we talked about the creation of the ESRB and talking about how Nintendo set specific content guidelines for what people could put out on their systems, and like that every licensee who put out something, for example, on the NES or the Game Boy, had to abide by these specific things. And I've read accounts by people whose job it was to try to make games accommodate for the Western market that Nintendo had these content guidelines on. And it wasn't always particularly straightforward, and it was often confusing and sometimes contradictory about the ways they did it. But yeah, Nintendo's always had kind of this really hard control about their brand, about their image, and about the amount of allowances they give for other people for their intellectual property. If they feel they're threatened by that, they will push back. So they've taken a lot of big stances, and now I'm going to talk about the most extreme one. And again, this is a fairly recent one. There's Gary Bowser. Anybody heard of Gary Bowser?
Any relation to Doug Bowser?
No relation to Doug Bowser, as far as I can tell, and no relation to the Mario antagonist Bowser. Although Nintendo's response might suggest that it might be some Mario getting some payback on the old dinosaur man. So Gary Bowser is probably the most extreme example of Nintendo's harsher than average approach. Gary Bowser, aka Gary OPA, ran public relations for Team Executor, or TX, which is a hacker group that specialized in developing and selling hardware for modding and jailbreaking game systems such as mod chips. In September of 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice arrested and successfully extradited Bowser, who at the time was a Canadian national living in the Dominican Republic, to Washington State, where they charged him and two other members of the group, Max Laurent, aka Maximilian, and Yanang Chun, aka 100+1, with 11 felony counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to circumvent technological measures and to traffic in circumvention devices, trafficking in circumvention devices, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. One of the group's products was a mod chip for the Nintendo Switch, and on April 16th, 2021, Nintendo of America sued them, accusing the group of dealing in products designed to violate Nintendo IP rights and encourage piracy. Bowser pleaded guilty in October of 2021, and on February the 10th, 2022, he was sentenced to 40 months in prison and fined $4.5 million. That's not all. As part of a settlement with Nintendo, Bowser also agreed to pay the company $10 million in restitution. Bowser was released with good behavior in April 2023. However, he's still on the hook to pay Nintendo the rest of what he owes, explaining in an interview for the site Torrent Freak following his release that Nintendo could take 25 to 30% of his monthly salary for effectively the rest of his life. They even garnished his wages while he was in prison, extracting a whole $175 in the process.
That
horrible.
sucks. Yeah.
It's amazing that this stuff doesn't get covered in the more mainstream press. I imagine if like average people knew about it, they'd find it a little extreme. $100, you're already in prison.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah,
and
I mean-
to your point, like that's like that would be some bad press for the people who are doing the wage garnishing, wouldn't it? Like maybe we think twice about patronizing them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they were kind of holding all the cards in that settlement, but I do wonder what Nintendo's math was to say that $10 million is what will make us whole, like for your restitution. Like, did they somehow attempt to prove that you caused us to lose $10 million worth of sales because of people who theoretically could have used your products to download illegal copies of our games and run them on their Switches? I guess is because it sounds like he wasn't selling stuff to let you play Switch games on your computer. So
Sounds like they were making an example of him.
That was the general consensus about this. It got a bunch of press coverage in the gaming press, particularly recently when Bowser got out of jail. And a lot of the conversation about this is the general discourse I've seen is that Nintendo has the right to defend their IP and all this stuff, but everybody thinks this is still a bit much. The way they went about this. One, the guy was like his work in there was in PR. He wasn't he wasn't a tech guy. It seems like he was just one of the guys who was easier to get a hold of from this hacker group that the federal government was able to extradite. Because there's other people that the feds indicted, they didn't get them. And this is the one they got. So they were going to go full force on this to send that message. And even the judge who did the sentencing says, I don't often make sentences that send a message, but this one, you probably can't avoid that it's sending a message. And again, the whole thing about that is like Nintendo wants people to see what could the consequences of this be. Because I mean, you could make the argument that in participating in a hacking group, specifically one that sells products, which is a controversial stance in the hacker community. Because again, remember, we talked about the hacker ethic, which is really based on this idea of a free and open exchange of ideas, that Nintendo was well within their rights to do this. And that is a valid argument that could be made. However, Bowser's story also demonstrates that Nintendo was determined to send the hacker community a very strong message. Pirate or encourage unauthorized uses of our products, and we will shatter your world. All of this points to a company that is determined to make sure that the only way you can experience their games is through the channels that Nintendo develops. So I hope you like paying $50 a year to have a license to other games in their vast library that Big N decides to drip feed to you on the Switch over the course of many years, that they could pull at any time, or to play them through a retro system that Nintendo make a limited run of that creates a secondhand market rife with price gouging. Yeah, I remember you, NES and Super NES Classic. I haven't forgotten about you. So with all that in mind, let's turn back to Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium and see how Nintendo responded to these elaborate pieces of fan art / unauthorized uses of their intellectual property. Let's start with Pokemon Uranium. On August the 13th, 2016, Nintendo sent a DMCA takedown notice to Pokemon Uranium's website hosts, as well as the host companies for several other websites where you could download the game. And likely seeing the legal writing on the walls, Involuntary Twitch announced the same day that she had removed the download link for Uranium from the homepage. In fact, Nintendo's lawyers were pretty busy that month. In addition to sending takedown notices for Uranium, they targeted a bunch of other Nintendo-related fan projects. For example, another high-profile fan game to get in Nintendo's crosshairs that month was AM2R, which you'll recall from our previous episodes was a fan remake of Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, developed by Milton Guasti, aka Dr. M64. Following a decade in development, AM2R launched on August the 6th, coinciding with the 30th anniversary of the release of the original Metroid. And within 48 hours, Nintendo sent DMCA takedown notices to both Guasti and a bunch of sites hosting the game, prompting Dr. M64 to make the game no longer available for download. In a blog post on the AM2R homepage dated August the 9th, he encouraged fans to show their support by buying the original Metroid 2 from Nintendo's eShop, writing, quote, "Please don't hate Nintendo for all of this. It's their legal obligation to protect their IP. Instead of sending hate mail, get the original M2 from the eShop. show them that 2D adventure platformers are still a thing people want, end quote. And if we can take any solace from that, a year later, Nintendo released an official remake of Metroid 2 titled Metroid Samus Returns for the 3DS.
And I believe that developer wound up getting a job at Moon Studios designing levels for the second Ori game. So his work on AM2R, he was still able to use it in his portfolio.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't know that. Another recipient of a Nintendo-branded legal notice was Fireside, a part of GameJolt.com, a fan game hosting site that included 562 Nintendo-related fan projects sporting such creative titles as, and these are all real, Flappy Mario, Mario and Luigi vs. the Furbies, Super Mario Bros. Rage Mode Welcome to Hell Edition, The Legend of Mario, Six Nights at Zelda's, a comedic FNAF parody, and Super Mario Bros. On meth and weed, as well as a bunch of Pokemon-themed games, including Pokemon Horror Version, Pokemon the Porn Game, and my personal favorite based solely on its title, Pokemon What Am I Doing With My Life Edition.
I love these games.
Yeah, please tell me we're going to watch a little bit of video on the Mario and Luigi Streets of Rage thing.
I don't know if I only got this list, so someone put the list on GitHub of all the file names that were taken down, so that's where I pulled this from. I don't know if they're around. Let me see. So we had Super Mario Bros. Rage Mode. Let's see if I can find that real fast.
I have to imagine that the Pokemon What Am I Doing With My Life is a regular Pokemon game, but like the player character is replaced with a middle-aged man who, and then like every time you beat a kid, the kid's like, all right, good for you. You beat a 6-year-old in Pokemon. What are you doing with your life?
I looked on YouTube. There are no videos of this game. So
What am I doing with my life edition could also be that guy with the 2 phones we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah. I meant to say the Super Mario Bros. Rage Mode is what I couldn't find. But let me look for Pokemon What I'm Doing With My Life Edition. No, I couldn't find anything on that. Leave it to your imagination. Despite the takedown, the Uranium team remained hopeful that they could continue to support the game, posting in their statement announcing the game's removal that they plan to continue offering Uranium-related content, including keeping the game's message board and Discord open. However, that changed several weeks later, when Involuntary Twitch received a formal cease and desist letter from Nintendo's lawyers on September the 1st. As she recalled in a post she put out on her personal blog a month later, quote, "In retrospect, there was absolutely no way this could continue indefinitely. The final nail in the coffin was on September the 1st when I received a letter at my front doorstep from the legal firm that represents Nintendo of America. It was printed on nice quality paper and had been sent via express overnight shipping, so that's how I knew it was serious. It told me that I needed to immediately stop our entire web operation, take down the server, stop providing updates, and stop generating ad revenue, or they'd sue me and the Uranium team for infringing on their copyright. My heart pounding in my chest, I went on our team Slack channel. This is the end, I told everybody. Uranium is finished. We said our goodbyes, and I mourned the ending of my life's greatest work," end quote. She officially shut down the Pokemon Uranium website a day later, and the team officially announced that they were ceasing operations through a September 21st, 2016 Twitter post. With that, let's check back in on Pokemon Prism, which was scheduled for a December the 25th, 2016 release. On December the 16th, the legal firm Addison's sent an early holiday present to Prism developer Adam Vieira, aka Cool Boy Man, and his team, in the form of a cease and desist letter on behalf of Nintendo. In a message with the subject heading, quote, "Unauthorized use of Nintendo's intellectual property," end quote, Nintendo noted Pokemon Prism violated the company's intellectual property rights and threatened legal action if Vieira didn't cease operations. The same day he received the notice, Cool Boy Man took down the content from the region website save for 2 things: a link to the PDF of Nintendo's cease and desist letter, and the message, quote, "Thank you for all your support throughout the years. More information forthcoming," end quote. And so with that, we're going to wrap up this episode, and we're going to save the response of the discourse to Nintendo's response to Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium next time. And we're going to see whether or not Nintendo's legal threats were actually effective. And along the way, we're going to talk about another bonus mini controversy as we finally wrap up our long talk about Pokemon ROM hacks and fan games. And so That will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Secret by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until our next episode, when we finally wrap up our talk about Pokemon Fan Projects, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Kate.
I'm Phil Thomas.
Elford here.
And I'm Andy Hunter.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.